joining us here for the session titled Bringing Vision to Life with Enterprise Service Delivery. This is one of those announcements like the captain makes in the cabin, so you know if you're going to the proper destination. My name is Arunkumar Iyer, and I'll formally introduce you. We'll both introduce ourselves in a minute, but just want to kind of put the theme in front of you. As you have seen from the keynote and from various other places around the booths and the ServiceNow demo ground, the AI platform for government transformation, looking at all different solutions on the same platform, single data model, trying to infuse AI within the platform to solve business problems in a cohesive and contextual way. Three main components being data, the fuel, the automation through the workflow, and the AI agents helping you to scale and increase efficiency and be effective and productivity. That being said, let me bring you to our guest here who will introduce himself, Don Bauer. A few words.
My name is Don Bauer. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Global Talent Management at Department of State. So I run the HR footprint globally for our department, manage a couple of ERPs, have a pretty substantial team support, running 70 applications, and yes, we're in the spotlight right now, as you can imagine. So,
thank you, Don. My full name is Arunkumar Iyer. I only say that because typically what happens in sessions like this is people look me up on LinkedIn and I say Arun Iyer and then they don't find me. So that's the only reason I say this. My title is very fancy, 4 words in a title, Principal Executive Enterprise Architect. Doesn't mean anything to most customers, but basically I work with value realization of the platform with customers and account teams. That's my role within ServiceNow. But here today we are going to discuss of bringing the vision, from vision to enterprise service delivery. And you saw the first slide where there was a lot of different applications in an organization, and we say, hey, on a single platform, how can you leverage what you have done before and then extend that and scale it? So since we have Don here who has gone through a lot of this kind of experience, my question is that vision to the reality and the journey that is, what was that original, bring everybody to one place, like a one-stop start. People say one-stop shop, but I prefer to say one-stop start, where you go in to start a different set of processes there.
Yeah, I think if you look at the evolution over the last few years, the emphasis on user experience. And for those that are currently at your organizations, I'm sure there's a ton of legacy applications. And what we experienced internally was I had 70 applications with 70 separate user experiences, right? The developer of the day figured out the menu structure, figured out the look and feel. So HR users, while everything worked, everybody was really frustrated that every time they change applications, they got to figure out how to use it again because nothing was standard. And so that was what I inherited from an organizational standpoint. And in 2019, 2020 timeframe, we were like, look, we're not going to retire this legacy debt. It is too deep, it's too long, technical debt, mountain, whatever you want to call it, in a way that would sufficiently give the end users, because a lot of times legacy debt retirement doesn't result in any improvement in user experience. It's really you're making it compliant, you're making sure that it's security compliant or whatever. And so when we looked at a platform, it's not a ServiceNow commercial, but it is, So the idea is when we looked at the platform, we looked at an opportunity to essentially put, and I used the term lipstick on the pig, right? We put a pretty front end on a whole bunch of legacy back-end code, and the idea is that it gave me instant user experience upgrade. And we worked very hard. I think the flexibility of the platform, we had built our own user experience standards as part of this legacy retirement. And I was able to take that same platforms, cascading style sheets, you name it, and we applied it to the environment. So my applications that are not embedded or abstracted still had the same UI. So now all of a sudden across all of our HR applications, it's the same look and feel. What you didn't know was behind the hood, it was still a bunch of hamsters running in the background and a bunch of legacy work. But the users immediately said, hey, we have an improved user experience. And I felt that was very important because part of, if you're in service delivery enterprise, it's trust, right? You have to gain the trust of your user community, because when they're asked, it's like, does this provide capability and service to you, or does it not? And we had a lot of problems with service delivery as just because somebody had to go into 7 different applications to get something done, their perception was they weren't integrated. We did have a common back end, but it didn't appear like it was integrated because the way we made the users kind of go through all those hoops to get something done. So a lot of those things we were able to kind of subsume into the platform. And as I was telling Arun before, it was like, once I put that front end, that abstraction on that front end, and that's a classic computer approach, model view controller, you abstract the front end from the back end, I could literally change out the back ends without users not even knowing it. So the beauty of it is that I could modernize, and what's the other fear that we all have when it comes to managing user expectations in enterprise? It's change management, right? So I did the one big, huge change management exercise with a whole lot of publicity and town halls and podcasts and all that. Once I got them on the platform, it gave me a little relief because now they're using a platform that they're comfortable with and they can use, and 5-way compliant, by the way, because we were very, very strict on that. It allowed me to go behind the scenes and start changing out legacy code or absorbing it. Some of them we actually absorbed into the workflow, others we retired completely.
So I mean, beautiful kind of, the way you laid out what you did to kind of get that vision and, bring people in. And you mentioned something which is dear to my heart is the OCM part of it, the organizational change management. Yeah. But I do want to ask a pointed question and a little clarification, because a lot of time what happens is when we do this enterprise service delivery, we are all focused on the end user, the people who come and request. But are we paying enough attention to those fulfillers in the back end, because their user experience also needs to be awarding those swivel chairs, and you said all the legacy applications where each one has a different data model, taxonomy, different kinds of vocabulary. Did you address that? How did you address that?
Well, actually, it's funny you bring that up, because that was kind of the second thing that I brought when we did the implementation was, and I think in HR is particularly guilty of this. We worry so much about the end user. Sometimes we actually put a greater burden on the HR practitioners because we don't think about them in the process. And we were very deliberate, I think, in this particular case. And part of the process, and you bring up change management. HR and IT is a really funny animal because HR people are very good at what they do. They don't speak IT. IT people are really good at solving problems, but they don't speak HR. So we have this really interesting situation where HR can say something and IT goes, got you. They build it and HR goes, that's not what I meant. And we have this back and forth. And so part of that process that we went through organizationally was we engaged all stakeholders. So we did the end users. We did the practitioners. We found out what their concerns are. We really paid attention to the idea of you're not doing this once. You might do it 100 times, right? Because the idea is that you have a user, they do one request. Well, what happens when there's 100 requests? Does the back-end person have to do like 100 clicks per one request, or do they do a few? So we really focused on making sure that the back-end, and sometimes it's a balancing act, and you have to actually, maybe some cases, and I will admit that I've done this, you put a little more burden on the user, right? I'm sorry, you're only doing this once. I got to respect the people that have to do 100 of these or 500 of these. So some of it works. Sometimes you get yelled at. Sometimes it's a failure and you learn and you move on. But the idea is that you always account for all of those steps in the process.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of put a certain set of terms for those. Having been a practitioner myself having done some amount of transformation, what we used to say is, yeah, we have a good novice mode, but do you have an expert mode? And that's the one you're talking about, the back-end people who have to do 100 invoices at a time, not one request at a time. So we're going to respect both of them. Exactly. So great kind of insight into that. Now, in this, when you say enterprise, the word enterprise means different things to different people in different organizations. Mm-hmm. In some places, the enterprise is everything in the organization, all kinds of systems. In some organizations, it's starts with HR typically because you're serving the employees, but it reaches out into different areas in the organization. So can you just give us a sense of the scale of, did you go to finance and facilities and, how many such?
Well, if you can imagine, if you're in the people business, everybody needs your data. So there's no shortage of that. And I think ultimately, a lot of what we work on, and when we speak enterprise, so imagine you have a whole bunch of different applications, and the only requirement on the developer was to go into the Oracle database, carve out their own private schema, copying a bunch of data elements that already exist, so duplicating data elements, and then building their little application and saying, I win because I'm part of the master enterprise state platform. And then you scan your database and you have 1,800 instances of PII that you have to manage. And then people complain because I updated this, but it didn't update over here. So the idea is like, okay, we had to take a very holistic view at the enterprise level and reduce that down to, okay, we only have 5 PII fields. Let's use those 5, and then let's facilitate the movement of those. That was internal. And then I had a whole ton of course, all of us live in the MOU world. Diplomatic security, we share data because people get clearances. Once they get the clearance, they come to HR. There's a lot of back and forth. So we literally just went through our enterprise and started really analyzing what our data needs were. And I didn't have a huge budget. I didn't get to buy some MuleSoft or great integration platform. We basically had to kind of, I would say, from organically define our standards and then just start enforcing standards. So we have an API standard, we have our own internal governance, and then as we are interacting with these different external groups, we just say, hey, this is the way we're interacting, here's our standards, here's our nomenclature, here's our taxonomy, you need to use this data, and we literally work across the enterprise to supply individuals with that. And then, of course, with the zero trust mandate and all the other new things coming on, is literally getting in front of that. So like the idea is as you do new, build it for the future. Don't literally do what you have to do today. Because it's very easy to go, we got it, integration done. It's a little harder to go, we can't use passwords anymore. We should probably use certificate-based authentication. Please build that into this model. And the customer's like, we don't do that. I'm like, yes, but we're gonna have to. So we kind of push the rest of the organization that, hey, as we're moving and building new, we always build for what the future is saying we should be doing, not for the easy path and a quick win. And sometimes it's a combination of both. Sometimes you say, I'll give you spreadsheets until you get ready to go, but until then, we're gonna do it the right way. And so that prevents the accumulation of the additional technical debt, because that's the other side of the enterprise. If you really look across enterprise, is as you're solving problems, are you incurring new debt? Are you saying to yourself, oh crap, 3 years from now, I'm gonna have to do this. I'm kicking the can knowingly, and sometimes we do intentionally, but the reality is don't kick it if you don't have to. And it takes you have to take a pause, and you have to say, this is an engineering problem, right? We have users, we have middle people, we have all the different enterprise and functionals, but you still have to look at it as an engineering problem and design for the future.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite some deep discussion here. I'm going to sneak in a little bit of a technical question for some people who might be thinking about this. Being an architect, it comes to me, so that's why I'm going to present this. And you don't have to go into great detail if you don't want to reveal the numbers and specific things, in the sense that when you say enterprise and we see in being a single platform, sometimes it's not one instance. Sometimes it's multiple instances. So in your discussion of the enterprise and how you solved it, did you have to go past one instance, or was it all in one instance?
Well, interesting. So Department of State has, I think right now, 5 or 6 ServiceNow instances. So we have our ITSM side, maybe more, I don't know. At one point it was 50 and you guys got caught, but we won't talk about that. So the idea is that our CIO shop has an instance, and we're actually part of that enclave. So we were playing enterprise. But I said, look, I will play in your sandbox, but I want my own instance because it's HR. And the idea of HR is I don't need anybody poking around in my instance of HR, because sometimes you manage sensitive situations. But then DS has an instance, because they're doing some work over there, diplomatic security, for those that don't know, and they're doing security, so they're even a higher standard of what we're doing. So the idea is that as we've evolved over the last few years with our platform, we're like, okay, we're now at a point where we have our instances talking to each other. We just rolled out our help desk for HR, one of the biggest complaints within the department as a whole was people would have a problem, HR people. The first thing they went to was the IT service center and said, I have an IT problem. An IT service center, not us, that's HR guys, talk to them. What did they do? Close the ticket. And the person goes, no, my issue's not resolved. Why did you do this to me? You know, and so there was this frustration around the whole user community because every time they put in a ticket, it gets closed. And they feel like they've never had their issue resolved. So we actually created an integration between the IT service management instance and the HR help desk. We just rolled that out earlier this year. So now if somebody comes in and the IT service center sees a ticket that's HR, in the back end, we move the ticket over into the HR instance, and then we manage it that way. And the user doesn't get this horrible, your case was closed, resolved, right? First click, you know, because everybody works on metrics, so the IT service center's like, close this thing fast. I don't want to get dinged for bad metrics. And we've started the handoff. And we're also doing a very, what I would consider to be a valuable service because there is a need for accommodation overseas embassies, for instance, and it's a medical devices. So now, you know, if you look at today's technology, people have hearing aids that are Bluetooth. Mm-hmm. Well, in our controlled spaces overseas, you're not allowed to have Bluetooth. That is a violation of a SCIF or security. And so these ambassadors and some of these people are coming in saying, I need my hearing aids. I can't do my job without them. And they're like, I'm sorry, that's Bluetooth. And of course, we're saying, well, you can't say no, it's an accommodation. So we had to put together a pretty complex approval process, evaluation of technology, evaluation of the space, the embassy looks at it. And of course, our Office of Accessibility manages the reasonable accommodation. And we actually use ServiceNow as an intake portal for HR, because that's where you make the request, but then we hand it off behind the scenes to DS and let them do their evaluation with the whole goal of a very efficient way of getting somebody's accommodation approved, so we don't have an ambassador 6 months after he's asked for accommodation telling the Secretary of State that we haven't complied with his request, because that happened, and we all got yelled at, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so thrilled with the way you're laying out this whole thing, because as I think about, you know, your experience, and I'm empathizing with people in the audience saying, hey, what about this and what about that? And in summary, when I look at it, you said, you took care of the user experience for the end users. Great, that was good, you know, hiding all the complexity, including triaging where the request is coming from, where it needs to go, and the user doesn't know about it. That's great. And you answered some of my technical questions saying, oh, who cares how many instances it is? You know, because sometimes you have to do it for DS, sometimes you have to do it for security, sometimes you have to do it for separation, sometimes it's across geographic borders. So all these things, but as an enterprise, you're still servicing that whole community with the hiding of the complexity. So being in this space, you probably have generated a lot of internal insights on how people use the platform, how there are efficiencies, but not all the requests or all the services are at the same level of sophistication.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting. We're going through this resignation program now. We've already built a workflow. My team had it stood up within a few days. We had a prototype to show to leadership saying, look, if we're going to manage a bunch of people resigning, we should probably track it, because it's a lot of steps, a lot of clearances, a lot of things going on. But a lot of that evolves from the fact that we've built in the capabilities. So the idea is that I've built connectors to my personnel platform. I've built connectors to other IT, and I've not, cover your ears, I haven't sold my soul and put everything in ServiceNow, okay? I use APIs to keep my data in the systems of record, but I still provide it to the end users on the platform as needed, right? And I did that intentionally to prevent any vendor lock-in, and then making sure that we can still use the platform as designed. So that capability now is really starting to pay dividends, because I build a generic service to send to the personnel folder. I build a generic service to do notification. We built a lot of generic services that now are being used across multiple workflows. So the idea is you approach it as an engineering problem with enterprise in mind, and you build out these modules, and don't let your vendor run down these rabbit holes of these unique coding situations. You say, whoa, step back. We can use this other places. Let's make it more generic. Let's engineer it to make it more usable across other workflows. And it's just paying huge dividends. Pregnant Worker Fairness Act was a perfect example. That came out, I think, the end of 24. We had like a very short, how many days did we have, Lauren? Maybe 60 days, 30 days? We had a really short time frame to stand up the ability for pregnant workers to opt into this program. I think in 3 weeks we had it up and running. Why? Because I already had all the connectivities to the enterprise tools, and I was just literally leveraging what I already had available to me and manifesting it in a different way. So the idea is that makes you ability to be responsive. Same thing with this DRP. We already have HR data. We already have the ability to do this. So we can actually bring it up very quickly. As soon as we match them, we know what's going on. And then we can focus on the work, which is clearances and indebtedness and all the other things that might happen.
Right.
Retirements.
Yeah, to your earlier comment, I feel like I should borrow from Bill McDermott and say, nobody has to lose for us to win. So, so that's just a sidebar. But your journey has been interesting. You've got a lot of data that you have already gathered because you're reaching into other parts of the organization. Are you ready for AI?
I think, anybody who deals with HR data, I think, and I will share this as a knowledge point for those who think HR is easy, because if you've ever gone to any of these conferences, the first thing they show you is how they're going to hire somebody with AI. That's it. It's like, hey, well, we'll just replace HR. Federal HR data is very interesting because it uses what's called an effective dated model. So if something happens today, I will put a transaction in the database with today's date. 6 months from now, something else happens to me, I put another transaction in later. Then they come back and say, oh, the rules changed. We have to go back in time and fix your records. We have to go, you were entitled to more pay. This was the wrong code. We have to fix it. So then we go back in time, and I change what that data was back in time, and then I change everything subsequently, and all those actions trickle down. And then that ultimately results in a change, right? So the idea that the problem that I have is that you might put a new rule in place today. So from today on, I have a new data standard I have to follow. There's a new business rule. There's a new data element that I'm tracking, right? But if I have to go back in time and fix your data from 5 years ago, that data element didn't exist 5 years ago. So I can't put anything in the system today that enforces the data integrity of that element, because if I have to correct something from the past, I can't enforce that new data element because it would break. So that's how HR data gets a little bit squishy, right? So people say, oh, your data's crap. I'm like, oh, no, I wouldn't go that far. I would say that it is a constantly changing dimension that we have to manage, and as such, we have problems with data quality enforcement because of the historical nature of HR information. So when you deal with that kind of a problem, and then somebody rolls in the door and says, give me every employee you have that has X, Y, Z, and we're like, oh, I need a little more data from you. I need some, you have to really say, can you be specific, because of the way this information is done. Now, back to your question about AI. If anything we know about AI is you've got to have good data to use AI, or you can fail very fast. And that's kind of the dilemma we're dealing with right now. So we're really looking at our data quality, because if I use that data quality to somehow put into a tool, and I always tell people this about HR, and we might be different from other folks who may embrace AI, but I'm like, I don't have the luxury of giving somebody the wrong answer. Okay, which means that's probably not the best use of AI in some cases, because you could ask the same question to a model and get a different answer every single time. It may be close, but not identical. That's where the agents, I think, come in, and RAG really starts to own it, because if you have retrieval augmented generation, you're using the same source of data, you're asking a question, it always resolves to the same answer, but it still uses all of the benefits of the natural language processing and some of the other inferences that you get from AI. That's a good use of it. I don't feel like industry-wise we're there yet, and of course you guys are just now introducing the agents, so the jury might be out on that. But that's kind of the battle I'm fighting right now. And the other thing too I would note about AI, and I've already encountered this a couple of times organizationally, because I'm on the innovation team for AI within our HR group, and everybody's ready to go and embrace it and use it because we're forward-leaning. Certain situations, for instance, where you're referencing documents, okay? We had a situation come up where they said, wow, this would be great if somebody could just say, show me a location overseas that has great schools, low crime rate, low housing costs. This is a perfect thing for generative AI, right? You put all the data, all these locations into AI, and then it says, you should go to Paris, right? But those documents change every month, and there's 6,000 of them. So I load them into the system, and that day they're great. In 30 days, what do I have to do? Well, if I'm going to be true to the thing, anything that's changed, well, if I put 2 documents in with 2 different sets of information about the same place, the model might pick one day and pick one the other day, which means now my information is suspect, right? I can't trust it. Now, can you imagine somebody using that and with their children and ending up in a location with very bad schools or a very high crime rate because the model said this is the best place for you to go and they took it because it was an advantage post and all this? They're going to come back at me and go, your system lied to me. You ruined my life. I mean, that's a legitimate. Sorry, that's a legitimate concern. So when I told my team that, I'm like, yeah, so we have to dump and reload this every month. Or every time a document changes, now we have to track what document changed, remove the old one, put the new one in. So the model is always there. And nobody has talked about the operations and maintenance side of AI when it comes to referencing your own internal data. And that is a huge issue that we must address. And I welcome strategies of how that's going to be managed, because it almost is going to need its own like software architecture in order to manage that in a way. And maybe AI can manage it and say, hey, this document changed, take this one out and put it in. But that has to be at the front of the conversation, not in the, oh crap, we screwed up, somebody just made a bad decision because the AI gave them bad information. Does that answer your question?
You've presented a solid problem, and I think a lot of discussion around this in terms of strategies and maybe prompt engineering and revising prompts, all those kind of things. But this is absolutely valuable for everybody who's listening. We are all going to have different kind of data, currency, cohesiveness, contextualization before we get that. But we are going to incrementally go there.
But now, I know I just did gloom and doom, but there are good uses. For instance, we just rolled out a career pathing tool where our vendor took 20,000 position descriptions, fed them into a model, and extracted about 1,000 skills that are across our civil service. Why? It's static data, right? It's safe, it's usable. Well, now we have all these skills in the database and people can go in and say, I have those skills. So that's a great use of it. And I know obviously classification is a big opportunity for that, because again, that's a well-defined process, and there's still going to be human in the loop, but I feel like there are opportunities to use AI and what I consider to be in that there's a line, right? A safe line that we could still use it. It can still benefit, it can still save work and benefit the user community. So those are the areas where I'm kind of exploiting now while we figure out these other things, because we don't know what we don't know yet. And the industry's changing so fast that by the time I'm thinking of something, 3 people have already popped up saying we do it. So, from that standpoint, and of course, we're in a very tight fiscal environment right now. We're under a microscope for everything we're doing. So it's really hard to even pop your head up and see what's going on, because we're so busy responding to the emergent stuff that's happening right now.
Great. I know this topic, I think we have not done it justice just having 35 minutes in this session. And we have such a insightful speaker. So I do want to kind of pose this question to you to offer something as one key takeaway for the audience.
Takeaway. Okay. I think ultimately, if you're in a program management role, I think there's always this, you're under, and I'm in fact PPM, I manage $100 million, levels and stuff like that. And I've really worked hard to do that. But the idea is that if you are charged with the responsibility of managing something at an enterprise level, you have to approach it as an engineering problem and always look at across the landscape. It's very easy to rabbit hole down the task and not see the other stuff until somebody halfway through implementation goes, excuse me, but there's this reporting requirement that we didn't tell you about that requires integration with a system by law that you missed, and then all of a sudden your entire project plan is flipped upside down because you didn't know what you didn't know. So I think those are the opportunities where if you're doing enterprise, you really need to make sure that you understand the full scope of what enterprise means in your world, and make sure all of those stakeholders at least get a little bit of light of day in the conversation about what you're doing. And I can tell you, we are doing something right now internally for position management. And if you know anything about positions in the government, budget has a piece, classification has a piece, HR has a piece, There's all kinds of chargebacks, and we have these automatic working capital funds that manage certain positions. So there's a whole litany of individuals who contribute to what is just considered to be a small position. And when we undertook the opportunity to create this thing called a hub, we basically had meetings with every single one. We talked to our budget people and said, hey, we want to talk to you about fiscal strips and how positions are funded. And they're like, nobody's ever asked us that before. Sure, we'll show up. And they were very happy to be included in the conversation, because I can tell you 9 times out of 10, that becomes a sticking point on a position if you have to pay salaries or whatever as the funding strip. But having them at the table and them having their own view into a centralized view of positions, that's the other side of this. Everybody builds their own spreadsheets and their own desktop implementations, and it's clean and whatever according to their world. But then when we marry it up with enterprise data, then somebody in the leadership role goes, what the hell's going on here? Because your numbers don't match their numbers, and then they don't trust anybody. So the idea is the more you can get everybody together on the same view, the less leadership is going to distrust your information, because it's all coming from the same source.
Stakeholder engagement.
Very much so. And change management, but that goes without saying.
We have a few minutes. I want to open the forum to a couple of questions. Any questions that you have for Don? As you can see, there's a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom through scars. So we'll kind of use that. So anybody have a question? There's a microphone right up there if you want, or you can just shout it out.
So Don, you're talking about enterprise and not going down a rabbit hole. How do you suggest, and this is from experience, that everything has an exception to the rule? So when you're building and you're bringing something into an enterprise service, how do you suggest you work with stakeholders who are saying, this is the way it works, this is the way it works, to say to them, we understand that this is the way you work, but let's do a business process for modeling to fit better with the enterprise system and help with all of those exceptions that keep making everything better?
Well, you speak to something that we've suffered greatly on in our organization.
Just let me repeat the question for those
sure.
who did not hear. So I think the question was, how do you manage the exceptions to the rule when there are many stakeholders and you maybe have or have not an opportunity to do business process remodeling?
Right. So for all those of you that work in the government, you have your policy people, and they will tell you this is the way the world works. And if you put them in charge of your software will reflect policy. And then when you actually try and use it in the real world, it never works, because to Lauren's point, there are 1,000 exceptions to the rule. The lesson we learned was, do not put your product owner as a policy person. They're a business consultant and have a technical product owner. And that's the idea, is that you have to ask those questions. Because if you code yourself into a corner, which is exactly what we did, we spent 2 years developing a tool that it took 4 months to unwind all the rules we put into it because of every exception that popped up. Some of which were done by very senior people, not following any of the rules that we put in place for everybody else, but the reality is it still had to be addressed and managed. So that was part of what we did. And of course, that's where the technical leadership comes into the project. You let the business function say, this is required, and then you ask around, is this really required? And it's like, not. Okay, let's just put a little flexibility, build some flexibility into the tool to allow that to happen. And that's ultimately what we ended up doing. And now going forward, that's our new model. Business functional contributor, SME, technical leadership on the project, still understands the business capabilities, but there's a little bit more of a tempered approach to what we're implementing to make sure that we don't find ourselves completely boxed in. So I saw your hand.
Yes, sir. I have a couple of questions for you. I'll keep it to two. How did you go about collecting user feedback whenever you were looking at redesigning kind of your user portal and eventually decided to go to ServiceNow? So
we did a ton of things. A lot of transparency, first of all. I think I'll break something here. So very transparent. So the idea is, once we decided to do this, hey, you're on the train with us. So every user in the organization was in the loop. I think my email address list had 900 people on it. I did a podcast. I did town halls. Every incremental release that we did in ServiceNow, everybody could go look at it. So the idea was, we didn't go off in a corner and build something and then go, woo, look what we did. You could see it. And that generated organic feedback. Like, well, we have a question. How are you handling X, Y, and Z? And that feedback would be incorporated in the next iteration. So that was one of the things that we had done. We did JAD sessions where we literally picked groups and we sat with them and did, a lot of the, I think, what is Deloitte call it, greenhouse or whatever. But the idea is like, we didn't even talk systems, we talked business. Like, in the perfect world, what would you expect this to do for you? And really collected a lot of that. Had nothing to do with how many fields, what was required, what are the business rules, but what's the outcomes that we're looking for. And those informed a lot of our decisions about how we move forward with implementation, because we were now responding to business needs, not functional requirements, where they're totally different. And a different group of people would actually define those. So, does that help?
Oh, yeah, that's great. The other question I have was, you said you have some connectivity between other instances that your instance interacts with. Is change management kind of a piece of that? So if they have a change that kind of affects y'all's organization, does it?
Yeah, I think at the level that we're interacting, it's pretty much core functionality in the platform. So I don't know that we have, obviously defining what it gets exchanged between the two, but these are handing a regular ITSM ticket off, the same structure back. I think the biggest challenge to that was getting the security folks to sign off on it, because they were like, no freaking way, this is not going to happen. I'm like, please, we can do this securely. And yeah, it took a lot of negotiation and a lot of analysis to ensure that we could even have two instances on the cloud talk to each other in a safe and secure way.
Great.
Nope.
I'm really hoping that follow up on that question, because I think I can get the security buy-in as it's my instance. What were some of the other challenges with getting it to talk to your other ServiceNow instances?
Yeah, can I just take a quick pause on that? I know there's a whole schedule in front of us.
Oh, yeah.
So we will kind of, table that question. We'll be available after this, but I have to personally thank, on behalf of ServiceNow, despite the weather, despite all the challenges that we have had, you have all made it here. Thank you very much for being here. It's a great acknowledgement of our events team, our marketing team. So thank you all. Thank you to Don. We were in constant contact on whether we would be able to make it or not. So thank you very much. And, so insightful. And a lot of these kind of sessions is what we also have at Knowledge, which is coming up in May 6th through 8th. So that's the slide I just put up there. And please, if your schedules permit, and your
travel budgets.
Travel budgets.
No, not gonna happen.
But a lot of this content also becomes available later. Even the content here eventually is released, over a period of time. So take those opportunities, and a lot of what is happening here is that collaboration, is that question. I don't want to leave it unanswered, but just respecting the schedule. So thank you all, and have a great rest of Federal Forum. And thank you, Don.
Thank you, everybody.